Hiya, I know this is a little later than usual. Long work day, crazy weeks with holidays, because we haven't had those in a long time. But anyway, here I am. This week's Parsha is Parshat VaYigash. I also want to wish everybody a happy last day of Hanukkah, and may this coming year, 2025, be a better one. As somebody said, a Rav said that was asked, do I make New Year's resolutions? And people in the observant Jewish community say, no, it's not our New Year. And he's like, let's take all the New Year's we can get. People are asking to be better, to do better. What's wrong with that? Anyway, the Parsha discussion for this week is entitled Strange Happenings and God as the Director. I begin this week, as I often do and use, with some wisdom from my teacher, with whom I've only been in the same room 3 times, but from whom I continue to learn every day. You can probably name one of the 3 or 4 that I'm going to say. Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, Zichronu L'Shalom. I want to explain. Rabbi Sacks was not just a man of Torah, but clearly a man of the world. And he constantly conducted important conversations between both entities, from which we will continue to live and to learn, though now he is sharing his insights with Ribono Shel Olam. This is just the beginning of his discourse on our particular Parsha this week, VaYigash. Rabbi Sacks teaches, there are rare and special moments when the world changes and a new possibility is born. When the Wright brothers in 1903 made the first man-made flight, or in 1969 when Neil Armstrong became the first man to set foot on the moon, or when, almost 6,000 years ago, someone discovered that marks made in clay with a stick could, when the clay dried, become permanent signs, and thus writing and civilization as we know it and experience it were born. In 1949, when Johann Gutenberg invented the movable type printing press, though the Chinese had developed it 4 centuries earlier. In 1821, when Faraday invented the electric motor, or in 1990, when Tim Berners-Lee created the World Wide Web. There is such a moment in this week's Parsha, and in its way, it is no less transformative than any of the above. It happened when Yoseph finally reveals his identity to his brothers. While they were silent and in a state of shock, he goes on and he says these words. We have often spoken about what forces wordplay when Yoseph does reveal himself to his brothers after a protracted set of curious circumstances that may seem circuitous or needless when looking from the outside. And with that, we look at chapter 45. ולא יכול יוסף להתאפק לכל הניצבים עליו ויקרא הוציאו כל איש מעלי ולא עמד איש איתו בהתוודע יוסף את אחיו. Yosef could not bear to have what is going to happen in the presence of all the people standing there. So he explains, everybody leave. הוציאו כל איש מעלי, take everybody out. There is no one left standing near Yosef when he makes himself known to his brothers. Now, when we look at the words "V'lo yachol Yosef l'hitapek l'chol hanitzavim," it means Yosef could not restrain himself between all of those standing, meaning perhaps that the Egyptians would all be standing out of honor for him, and they would hear his brothers, and Rashi adds, being shamed as he made himself known to them. So what Rashi wants to suggest, and we're going to be looking at Rashi's interpretive translations consistently as we continue in our prakim, is that he did not want his brothers to be shamed. L'chol hanitzavim. Now, nitzavim is an interesting word here because as we have seen already, we know that it's not a casual standing around and chatting, but rather it's a formal appearance at court. Nitzavim always has the meaning and the intention of standing at attention. The very word, the root, nun, tzadi, that is the same as matzav, a situation or a standing set of circumstances. He breaks into a loud weeping. Vayitena kolo bebechi vayishma'u Mitzrayim. Now, on the surface, there's a disconnect here. Because if he wants them to leave so that they don't see what's going on, he breaks into this loud weeping that the Egyptians hear. And everybody in the household will hear about it as well. So, whose reputation is he trying to protect here? Is he worried about shaming his brothers? Or is he worried, as Rashi might have it, or is he worried about being seen as lesser in this kingdom in which hierarchy was everything? At this point, we're told, Vayomer Yoseph el achiv, ani Yoseph. He says to his brothers, Yoseph, I am Yoseph. Ha'od avichai, is my father still living? V'lo yaklu achiv la'anot oto ki nivhalu mipanav. They couldn't answer him because nivhalu. Now, nivhalu really has the sense of being confused, being like completely thrown off guard. Here they thought that Yosef was dead all these years, and here he is as the very one who's giving them grain to sustain them. Now again, Rashi wants us to read it as they were disconcerted before him out of shame. However, the word nivhalu, and this is my adding to the conversation here, can mean anything from profound panic to anxiety to disconcerting to being confused to shame. Rashi takes this as shame. But could it be sheer panic given what they had done? In other words, could it not just be confusion, but could it be, oh my, look at what we did to our brother, and look at where he is now. Of course, he's going to get back on us, and this is going to be terrible. And remember that they were not pleased with Joseph's dreams in the beginning. So here we have a question about readiness on all sides, confusion on all sides. Could God have fashioned this obstacle course of occurrences so that it was necessary that everyone involved experience different dynamics that would ready themselves for this moment? In other words, we're looking at the outside and we're saying, oh, he sends everybody out. He cries out loud. That's a problem, as we've said. He reveals himself to his brothers. But it's not so simple. And it's not that we're not aware of the inside reactions that are going on. We're looking at it at the outside. There's this notion called the dominant narrative. And dominant narrative is a term that's being used today a lot in educational circles regarding how do we teach history. In many cases, we teach this dry, kind of siloed, one-lane narrative where people that are seriously impacted don't see themselves in the story. And this is creating a lot of contention, a lot of lack of knowledge, a lot of dissension. So how do we look at the dominant narrative but then parse out how this one is relating, how this one is reacting, what's the impact on this one? So when we look at this as a dominant narrative, what the commentators want us to do here, and what I'm challenging us to do, is to parse out each of the situations, make a sociogram. How does it affect each other? It's not this dry, singular tale. Maybe God fashioned this obstacle course of occurrences so that everyone gets to experience this mixture of reactions. Nivhalu, they're confused, they're anxious, they're all of these things together in order that this moment can be responded to in an appropriate manner. Yosef then says in the dominant narrative to his brothers, Geshu na alai, please come toward me, VaYigashu, VaYigash, he approached, right? There's our title. I am Yosef, your brother, ani Yosef achicham asher machartam oti Mitzrayim, that you sold into slavery, or you sold me in Egypt. Now again, Rashi adds the words that lead us to slavery, but remember, they don't know that. They just know that they put him in a pit, basically. So he's saying to himself, according to Rashi, Now my brothers feel ashamed. He therefore, Geshuna Eli. Remember that word na? That kind, pleasant, please come, not shouting at, but trying to engage with. And try to do this in a way to show them that he was engaging with them, that he didn't have any nefarious kinds of agenda, that he just wanted this reconciliation somehow. Then he says, Ve'ata al te'atzvu, ve'al yichar be'einechem ki mechartan oti. Hena ki l'mechiya shalachani Elohim b'fnechem. Don't be atzuv, don't be sad, don't be distressed. Ve'al yichar, don't be angry at yourselves that you sold me. Why? Because God orchestrated all of this. God sent me ahead of you so that we could prepare for your needs. In other words, this was set up by God. And it's my line, I always say, a coincidence is God's way of remaining anonymous. The idea that God sees this whole picture. We're looking at the picture from our limited vision, our field of vision. But we're getting the big story here. God sent me, Yoseph says. Because it's now already been 2 years, verse 6, that there's been a famine in the land. There's 5 more to come, but God sent me to make sure that you will be okay. Ve'ata lo atem shalachtim. He repeats, you did not send me. Hena ki Elohim. God is the one who sent me, who made me Pharaoh's counselor and lord over the household and ruler over Egypt. In other words, Yoseph, with all this time that has passed and everything that has happened to him, may very well have resolved that this was all part of God's plan and is now sharing this with his brothers, who obviously do not have the vantage point of all that happened to Yoseph and how it served a purpose and how he got to where he is now. This may even be seen as a type of takana, a reparation of past problems, as this is his sharing, seen in contradistinction to his earlier sharing of his dreams. Remember, when he shares his dreams, he almost shouts them out. Come, listen, God has made me, I'm the sun, you're the moon, you're the stars, you're the sheaves of wheat. But this is a very different conciliatory tone, soft tone. Geshona, please come close. I know you're afraid. Please trust me. So let's turn our attention to another brother who also seems to be involved in some excessive role that may seem unneeded. As the Parsha begins, before the revelation that is this pivotal point that we just discussed, Yehuda speaks, and it is from his approach that our Parsha takes its name. Again, VaYigash. They approach. VaYigash, they love Yehuda. Yehuda approaches Yosef and says, Adoni yadaber na avtacha daber ba'aznei Adoni va'al yichar pechad avadecha kim kamocha kapara. Very effusive. Please, my Lord, let your servant speak a word. He wants to move him. He wants to engender compassion because he doesn't know this story. Looking at this from Yehuda's point of view, you have to forget everything I just shared, even though that is the position that Yosef is in when Yehuda approaches. You are the equal of Pharaoh, my Lord. Do not become angry at your servant. We see this happening many times when there's a fear. Remember Yaakov and Esau? Please, my Lord, I have come. We see this attempt at giving the other person what's called the Yad Elyonah, the upper hand, when one is afraid that that person may attack them. Acknowledging servitude to them, if you will. Then he says, do you have a father? Do you have a brother? Yosef asks, and we answered, we said we have an aged father, and there was also a young son who was born to him in his old age. Achiv met. Now, imagine Yehuda saying this. Remember the family dynamics. You've got 4 mothers. You've got these 12 sons. We're not even talking about Dinah or any of the others right now. We're just talking about the sons. Sorry. And Yehuda is acknowledging that this little boy, this son, younger one, he's talking about him as a katan, right? A little person. His brother died. Not we put him in a pit, whatever, but his brother died. And he alone remains to his mother and to his father, who loves him dearly. He then launches into a somewhat lengthy narrative that seems to be superfluous, as it does not add anything to what is already known. It will repeat a lot of information that we already have. Further, his use of gratuitous platitudes and his excessive statement of subservience is hard to not see here. Ramban, Nachmanides, explains that this very approach was to arouse compassion by sharing that there was suffering on their side too. The notion being that, now again, they've not completely squared off in terms of what has happened in each of their realities. But Yoseph knows where he is. Yoseph remembers what happened. Yoseph knows how his father thought that he died. And yet everybody's kind of sort of playing a little dumb here, if you will, right? But Yehuda wants Yoseph to know that there was suffering on that side. In his mind, Yehuda is taking perhaps a cheshbon nefesh and saying, yes, you have suffered, we have caused that. We've also suffered. That brother died, our father has mourned, he's holding on to his youngest son. We are also in that situation. As Aviva Zornberg explains, all members of this family are, quote, victims of fate, circumstances, and the imperatives of survival, end of quote. She explains that while Yehuda's speech may and does indeed feel excessive, it was necessary to ensure that Yoseph would respond with compassion and concern, not reflecting residual anger. So here we have a causative effect on the human level, but God is indeed the director. As Yoseph is brought to an understanding of the situation, while some traditional commentators suggest that there's a menacing element to Yehuda's approach to Yosef, perhaps invading his personal space, as we might think of it. The very word VaYigash also evokes a wide range of meanings, from being used in approaches of warfare and conflict to appeasement and even prayer, and approaching God with our innermost thoughts. Here, could it reflect readiness in the first instance, being ready for conflict, and praying it would all work out simultaneously? Look at the phrase, ki kamocha kaparo. We know that you are on an equal footing with Paro. This may very well predispose us to thinking of the first option. Yet when we consider the result, namely the resulting unmasking of Yosef, it definitely has the latter effect. So now, in your minds, put together the Yosef part of this narrative. Forget the dominant narrative for a moment. The Yosef experience, the Yehuda experience, and you see how coming together is very involved on so many levels here. As we continue, we will see yet another instance of bringing together of disparate entities in chapters 46 and 47. Now, the text says, chapter 46, verse 30, Vayomer Yisrael el Yosef, Amota hapam acharei ra'iti et panecha ki otechacha. Now, remember, Yisrael, Yaakov? So here Yisrael is used, meaning struggling, the father of the nation, letting go of the tribal unit. There's all kinds of reasons that we could look into the use of the name Yisrael. And he says, now I can die, amuta apam, I can die now. And Rashi adds in with contentment, having seen your face, knowing that you are alive. Yoseph then says to his brothers and to his father's entire household, I will go up to the palace, and I will tell Pharaoh that you have arrived. I will say to Pharaoh, my brothers and all my father's household who were in Canaan have come to me. These men are shepherds. Vanashim roetzon. They have always owned livestock, and they have brought along their flocks, their herds, and their possessions. At this point, Yoseph instructs his family to share that they are shepherds. This will simultaneously provide them with land to live and also keep away any potential enemies. We then move on to the next chapter. Yoseph then comes, tells Pharaoh as follows, as we just saw. VaYigash Paro, VaYomer Aviv Achiv Etzonan V'Bekaram Akol Asher Lehem Ba'u Ma'aretz Canaan V'Inam Ba'aretz Goshen. My father, my brothers, everyone, their flocks, their herds, their possessions, in other words, amplifying the fact that they are shepherds, have come with everything, and they are now in Goshen. He then selects from among his brothers 5 and introduces them to Paro. The ones that he chooses, it says, Umiktzeh achiv lakach, from those of lesser strength. Again, Yoseph presents himself as being this amazing negotiator now. He doesn't want to scare Paro. He wants to protect his brothers. There are so many moving parts here. The Venn diagram is quite complicated at this point in time. He would not want Pharaoh, suggests Rashi, to view them as strong and then make them warriors. If he does that, he will make them warriors to fight his wars. And so Yoseph, Rashi is telling us, is protecting his family here. I want to remind us that Yoseph has worldly knowledge and knew very well what the limits were in terms of how his family would be accepted. So he uses this knowledge to protect them, as God had protected them up to this point. In doing so, Yoseph is learning patience as well, and thus acts in a far different way than that impulsive behavior of his youth. He has learned communication skills and diplomacy, neither of which were apparent in his younger years. At this point, in verse 3, Pharaoh asks Yoseph's brothers, Mama sechem, what is your occupation? And what do they say? As we already know, Ratzon avadecha, gam anachnu gam avatenu. Generationally speaking, we are shepherds. We are shepherds. Our fathers are shepherds. We're all shepherds. We have come to live in this land because there is no grazing in our land. The famine has touched our land. So please let your servants, Vatayeshvu na avadecha be'eretz Goshen. Now, a little bit of context here. In the Egyptian culture, shepherds were seen as the lowest of the workers. I mean, think of cultures today where there are jobs or there are occupations or roles that will be fulfilled by people in the lower strata of society because the higher strata don't want to be bothered with them. Think of it in that way. They are not an honored lot here. So Yoseph is negotiating, A, that the issue of famine is resolved for his family. B, he doesn't lose his position in Pharaoh's court, note. C, he does not inflame Pharaoh in any way. And this is what you might call a win-win situation. Pharaoh then says to Yoseph, now that your brothers and your father have come to you, watch this. Aretz Mitzrayim lifnecha hi, b'mitav ha'aretz ha'shavet avicha ve'et achicha yeshvu be'aretz Goshen ve'im yadata ve'yesh ba'anshei chayil v'samtam sarei mikneh ala sheli. All of Egypt is at your disposal. Let's put your father and your brothers in the choicest part of the land. let them live in Goshen. And if you know that there are men among them who are capable, you will appoint them as stewards over my, ala sherli, over my livestock. In other words, you can have your land over here. And if you have these gifted folks in your family, amongst your brothers, as you have been gifted, and look at what you've done, please let me benefit as well. He's no dummy, right? Yoseph then brings his father Jacob, introduces him to Pharaoh, and Jacob greets Paro. And notice here, Vayavo Yoseph et Yaakov. He's not Yisrael here. He's Yaakov. Amidu lifnei Paro vayivarek Yaakov et Paro. And Jacob greets Paro. At this point, Rashi wants us to see that distance will have to be maintained between Egypt proper and Goshen. Some may not be happy with this and may want to vilify Pharaoh at this point, similar to how Achashverosh is seen when he promises Esther half of his kingdom. Only half? What's the big deal, right? However, let's consider another possibility. Ken and I were at a kibbutz in the Gaza envelope when we were in Israel recently. Ein HaShlosha. You haven't heard its name, but it was right there where all the destruction and horrors happened on October 7th. The reason you don't know the name, Ein HaShlosha, is because there was no damage, even though it is located literally right where Nir Oz and Be'eri and other places that suffered horribly are. Our guide Tomer explained that they indeed had Palestinian workers in their farms and that the farmland was outside of the kibbutz. We saw it. The kibbutz is here. There's a fence. We're standing at the fence. Here's the farmland. And here's Gaza. Their relationships between the kibbutz members and the Palestinian workers were cordial and with boundaries that were simultaneously respectful and also necessary because of the political reality. These workers wanted to come on October 7th to work and were told by their superiors to do so, even though they had known that no work must be done on the Jewish Sabbath. This is a religious kibbutz. Workers must rest, in addition to the people in the kibbutz. These workers did not know the layout of the residential area of the kibbutz, and they had no information to relay to anyone who would force them to do so. Now, this may seem unjust to some, but actually, it was what allowed the Palestinian workers and the kibbutz residents to maintain appropriate relationships, and no one went inside their kibbutz on October 7th. There is an important and a real lesson for us to consider here, even those of us who would like the world to be a kumbaya circle. Reconciliation, which eluded the previous generations in our Tanakh, does happen here between Yoseph and his brothers. This is what I believe Rabbi Sachs may have been hinting at as an important inflection point in our human history. He goes on to speak about forgiveness as being the novel concept, but I would pose that this is a prelude to some type of rejoining of parts of a relationship that had previously been severed. There's also a meeting of the minds of some sort between Pharaoh and our Israelite family. Simultaneously, there is an understanding of limits and boundaries that will allow all parties to survive and prosper. Yoseph sends everyone out for his family reconciliation. He negotiates where his family takes land that no one else is necessarily interested in. They will live there in peace, hopefully. Pharaoh says, if you find those that can help me, please send them to me. There is a reconciliation here, but this reconciliation to work is not about total acceptance and agreement. There is no kumbaya circle. Rather, it is about the recognition of differences and the use of reason to craft a realistic arrangement that will work for all parties involved. It will involve pshara, it will involve compromise. It will involve not the ideal that each person may have, but it's the bringing together of the realities that will temper the ideals and instead give us a workable solution. I would like to suggest that the reason that allowed such to happen had to involve preparedness and the more realistic expectations of what these arrangements of coexistence would look like. For the human participants, they needed time and experiences that would modify any grandiose expectations they may have envisioned. For God, the knowledge of this need is part of Ribbonu Shel Olam's continued arc of understanding the limits of human beings, and thus Hashem provides the time and knowledge informed by what may seem to be strange happenings and circuitous occurrences needed to reach this point. As I often say, let us celebrate what we share. Let us have respect and regard and understanding for the differences that are real. Let us learn to be realistic in our own expectations in our lives and yield to the director of it all. For us, Ribbonu Shel Olam, the Lord for our Christian friends, Allah for our Muslim friends, and whatever divine being various religious groupings pray to, that keep them humble and that remind us of the humility of what it means to be a human being. Shabbat Shalom to all.